Hello everyone, this is PK Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be a welcome breakdown where I talk about the greatest movie fight scenes of all time. Now various opinions will differ, but for me the movie fight sequence, a climatic bout, a final encounter or a duel can be hugely integral to an overall story. It can provide either a pivotal point in a narrative or indeed my personal preference, providing a final resolution or conclusion to the overall story. If both protagonists or opposing sides can be properly developed and established, then a final conflict can be extremely compelling and satisfying. And of course, from an action point of view, with the right amount of direction and editing, a fight scene can be every bit as exciting as a car chase, any war battle scene or galactic battle or space battle. So I always deem the final fight or movie fight to be extremely important to an overall story. So the criteria that I've set for this breakdown is that the first is that these fights must be a one-on-one bout between two people involved. So there's no other people involved, no last minute saves or other people providing the final blow. It has to be purely one person against another person. Now the second criteria is that for the most part it has to be a continuous sequence. It can't be interrupted and then returned to 5 or 6 scenes later on. Now the third point in this criteria is the most obvious one, is that there has to be actual fighting involved, where we see punches, kicks, throws, or grabbing or holding. So unfortunately it can't be shootouts or where the people use energy waves or beams. It has to be some sort of physicality within the conflict. So unfortunately this will discount many of the great duels from the classic Sergio Leone Western movies, as they are shootouts overall. The fourth point within the criteria is that there has to be some even competitiveness. A fight simply can't be a one-sided beatdown where one person is just struggling to survive against a superior force. So again, this is going to eliminate a lot of classic scenes from the likes of Predator and Aliens as well. So here we go then with what I deem are the top best ever movie fight scenes within all of movies and cinema. If you disagree with any of my choices, then let me know within the comments and then we can discuss and have further debate. So the first choice within this breakdown is John Spartan vs Simon Phoenix from Demolition Man. The sci-fi 90s action classic features both disgraced cop John Spartan and notorious criminal Simon Phoenix, both been recently released from some cryo prison in a futuristic setting. They face off against each other several times throughout the film, but it's the climatic fight at the end of the film which stands out the most. We have a very good sit-up to a great battle, emphasising very much Snipes' martial arts with Stallone's typical Rocky-esque body punches and hooks. This is very much about the quick edits amongst a great mix of choreography, where we see lots of throwing objects and shifting in dynamics back and forth between the two. Obviously Simon Phoenix is the superior force, having enhanced fighting abilities, but John Spartan more than holds his own. It's a great fight sequence overall and a great way to conclude what I deem to be one of the best science fiction action classics of the 1990s. We then go on to the next choice on this list, and that is Daniel vs Chao Sen from The Karate Kid Part 2. The climatic fight of The Karate Kid Part 2 is a truly intense encounter between both Daniel and Chao Sen, who wants revenge for being disgraced and disowned by his uncle. It's a well choreographed balanced fight with both combatants striking a fair amount of kicks and blows, the antagonism already established throughout the movie, so this fight has a heightened edge to it when comparing to the fights that we saw in the tournament in the first film, leading towards the fantastic finish. We see certain blood spilled between the two combatants. Chao Sen is the much more vicious and much more skilled combatant, but Daniel of course has that true virtuous nature, and following his training with Miyagi is able to stand up and compete with Chao Sen overall. So it's a fantastic fight, and I would think probably the best fight sequence in all of the Karate Kid franchise than what we've seen so far. So a great choice between Daniel and Chao Sen from The Karate Kid Part 2. We then go on to the next choice on this list, and that is Bruce Lee vs Johnny Sin in Dragon the Bruce Lee story. The very fun, entertaining Bruce Lee biopic may have taken certain liberties with the factual story of the iconic action hero, but it can't deny how amazing the fight scenes were throughout this film, and at the centrepiece we have the showdown round about halfway through the film with Bruce taking on Johnny Sin in a private fight. It truly is a masterful piece of fight choreography, everything from the setup where both men warm up with the various thrusts and stretches, and we see the crunching and clicking of bones as Bruce is stretching and extending himself. Fantastic to watch. And then we unleash a furious bout of high kicks and punches and scratches and flips and turns with no background music again for the most part, no shaky cam either. It truly is an awesome fight sequence. This is of course helped by the fact that lead actor Jason Scott Lee looks absolutely great as Bruce Lee, both in his physical form and his overall charisma. He had so many fantastic scenes throughout the movie itself, but this remains the best fight encounter out of them all. It's a wonderful bout, really expertly staged in terms of the fight moves as well. So a fine choice on this list as one of the greatest movie fight scenes that I've ever seen within all of cinema. We then go on to the next choice on this list, and that is Jen versus Shy Liao from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Ang Lee's immersive martial arts epic truly brought and defined very much so the wuxia movie into the mainstream for audiences, and it was defined very much so in this fantastic encounter between Michelle Yeoh's Xiao Liang and Zhang Ziyi's Jen. It's a fight that is full of kinetic energy and electric pace. It's a wonderfully staged exhibition of choreography as we see both combatants squaring off against one another within a quiet martial arts dojo, so very much of an isolated environment. Yes, we do get the typical pirouetted and wire work mechanics in terms of the overall fight as what we associate so much with the wuxia genre, but to be honest, it's kept to a minimum for the most part during this fight. We emphasise very much on both combatants trying to strike one another down, particularly the more aggressive and offensive Jen, who constantly has the Destiny Sword, whereas Xiao Liang uses various other objects and weapons around the dojo, adjusting her fighting style for each object. Fantastic intensity and choreography that maintains the real feel of threat and danger for what must be close to around a 4 to 5 minute fight running time. So such a fantastic scene, helped by the fact that both Michelle Yeoh and Zhang Ziyi are two fantastic actors who can perform a lot of their stunts, which always helps maintain the overall credibility and authenticity of a fight sequence. So without question, one of the finest ever fight sequences that we've seen put on screen in this bout from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. We then go on to the next choice, which I'm sure would be selected by many people who were doing a similar breakdown in terms of iconic movie fights, and that is of course Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader from The Empire Strikes Back. The first big encounter between the two. This encounter is very much made more famous for the revelation at the end, more than the fight itself, but the encounter itself is very much fantastic. The real build up was emphasised even more so earlier on, of course, when we learn that Luke has been training for Yoda in terms of this eventual encounter with Darth Vader, and you can really feel the cold atmosphere and tension as you truly appreciate that Vader is the more superior and powerful force. We have a certain narrative structure behind this fight where we see Vader fighting Luke one-handed because he generally wants Luke to join him and the Emperor within the Empire, but Luke suddenly becomes much more resolute and shows far more ability than I think Vader believes that he did have. I also love the way that Vader manipulates certain objects and throws them around Luke, and this fight feels far more physical and less choreographed than the other fights that we saw, and particularly from The Phantom Menace and also Revenge of the Sith. We have that great moment when Luke strikes Vader on the shoulder with the lightsaber, and Vader comes back even stronger, clearly indicating that he's not completely human, and once again really ramping up how powerful of an individual he is. And then of course we finish the bout with Darth Vader chopping off Luke's hand before revealing very much that he is indeed his father. So it's actually a fight sequence that carries enough extra weight in terms of the overall trilogy itself. I did also consider including Luke's second bout with Darth Vader within Return of the Jedi, but that fight I believe is too much interrupted by all of the space battles, whereas this fight sequence here is far more of an isolated encounter and therefore has far more of a concentrated and focused feel about it. So a great movie fight, and not only that, certainly one of the most iconic fight sequences within all of cinema, and that is Darth Vader versus Luke Skywalker within The Empire Strikes Back. We go on to the next choice on this list, and that is Jin versus Lino from the House of Flying Daggers, a simply audacious and wonderful final duel between the two officers who are essentially fighting to be with female warrior Zhang Ziyi. The fight first of all takes place in an open summer field full of sunshine as we get a furious mix of punches and sword of clashes. We then get an extreme bout of climate change when the summer landscape all of a sudden turns into a snowstorm as the battle intensifies. It's an absolute stunning climatic fight, carrying also a lot of emotional tension given the character story. One of the best examples of having a great duel that carries weight and context to the overall narrative. Again, this is a duel that must go on for about 3 to 4 minutes with no interruption from other scenes, and it all culminates in a truly tragic conclusion that we get towards the end of the movie. So a fantastic scene for a truly incredible movie itself. We then go on to one of my favourite movie fight sequences of all time, and that is Rocky vs Apollo Creed, the rematch from Rocky 2. The much anticipated rematch between Rocky and Apollo still remains one of cinema's greatest ever fight scenes, as Apollo is driven by wanting to prove himself that the first fight between them in the first film was very much of a fluke where Rocky went the distance. And this motivation from Apollo is really what adds so much more intensity to the second fight, with Apollo trying to knock Rocky out straight away within the first 2 rounds before Rocky typically fighting back at the end of the second round, and what follows afterwards is a thunderous mix of fast pace, atmosphere, very much of a gladiatorial contest, as we mix in Apollo's speed and boxing skill with very much more of the pugilistic willpower of Rocky. It's dramatic, it's compelling, mixing continuous action with far more of slow motion scenes, accompanied by Bill Conti's epic soundtrack. This is truly how to produce an epic fight climax to a movie. Perhaps it's the first or second best fight within the franchise. Overall, I'll leave that to further debate, but without question, the rematch between Rocky and Apollo Creed rightly stands as one of the best movie fight sequences of all time. We then go on to the next choice on this list, and that is Achilles versus Hector from Troy. In terms of sheer execution, this fight is one of the best choreographed sequences that I've ever seen, as we see Brad Pitt as Achilles looking all vengeful following Hector inadvertently killing his cousin within battle, thinking it was Achilles himself. Some great building in terms of dialogue between the two characters before the combat ensues, and what a duel it is, full of great thrusts and dodging and maneuvers. This is very much more of a contrast between Achilles' stealth and athleticism against Hector's resilience and determination. We have a fantastic mix of styles and contrast in what is really far more of a skilled contest, and you have to credit both actors, Brad Pitt and Eric Bana, in performing a lot of their stunts throughout the sequence. It is exhilarating and pulsating in terms of a movie fight, and definitely one of the best that I've ever seen on screen. Again, it runs for a full-on 4 to 5 minutes, absolutely fantastic. Visually very stunning to look at, and although the film clearly establishes that Achilles for the most part is the protagonist throughout the story, you're clearly rooting for Hector to win this bout. So just a great visualization of a truly mythical contest between Achilles and Hector from the movie of Troy, and a fine entry on this list as one of the greatest movie fight sequences of all time. We then come up to the runner-up within this breakdown, and for this choice we're simply talking about perhaps the most iconic cinematic duel or fight sequence, certainly part of one of the most culturally transcendent movies ever, and that's of course Rocky vs Drago from Rocky IV. After seeing his friend Apollo get battered to death by Ivan Drago, Rocky ventures out to Russia for revenge. The fight itself is the culmination of all of the iconic fight montages and 80s soundtrack songs expertly set up. When we go to the fight itself, it's such an expert in terms of its setup, where we first of all see Drago's ring entrance and we get those slow motion face and close-ups between the two opponents. The fight unleashes in the first 2 rounds with Drago overpowering Rocky with these thunderous punches, and of course Rocky again retaliates in a typical fashion in that classic sequence when he cuts Ivan Drago, which really heightens all of the dramatic tension throughout this fight. And what follows after in the subsequent rounds is an epic, hyperactive, stylized fight sequence full of energy, intensity and momentum, fueled by supreme levels of editing and that epic Vince Dakota soundtrack with the music track titled War. Rocky's fight with Drago still remains a pure piece of comic strip violence, an epic attack on the senses, and we can have various ongoing debates about which is overall the best fight scene within all of the Rocky franchise. Is it this bout with Drago, or is it Apollo's rematch with Rocky? I truly believe that this fight probably edges it, just in terms of sheer pace and energy, but without question Rocky's bout with Ivan Drago still remains today one of the most iconic and well revered fight sequences of all time within all of cinema. And so we come to at last the #1 best ever cinematic fight in movie history, and it comes most appropriately with 2 of the most iconic action heroes of all time, Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris playing Tang Long and Colt in their mythical encounter in The Way of the Dragon. Every way the perfect movie in terms of a one-on-one fight sequence. We have an isolated space and environment, we have a mixture of normal speed and quick cuts and slow motion. There's the primary setup of warm-up stretches with no music. In terms of the narrative of the fight itself, we see that Chuck Norris is clearly the stronger opponent, and he begins to have the upper hand in the first half, where I believe Bruce Lee tends to underestimate how powerful his opponent is. Chuck Norris is more about brute strength and focused maneuvers and punches, knocking Bruce down several times. And what makes this fight such a brilliant sequence is that we actually see a lot of tactical nous and strategies throughout the sequence. When we see Bruce changing his stance and his overall fight positions, when he gets up and he suddenly starts bouncing on his toes and very much adopts much more of a boxing style as he evades a lot of the roundhouse kicks from Chuck Norris, which are very much telegraphed, in Bruce is backing off, trying to find his overall range and distance before coming back on the offensive with an ultra fast combination of punches and kicks, looking to wound Chuck Norris in terms of his leg and his arm. We see Chuck Norris later on studying the foot movements of Bruce, so again there's a wonderful sense of almost an intelligence between these 2 combatants amongst the intense encounters of the fight. It's an absolute classic encounter, back and forth, full of suspense and very much of bizarre and unique moments, with the zooming in and zooming out in a climatic bout, especially with the cat as well. Very funny moments as well. But despite all this, it still remains the most epic fight scene, running at close to nearly 8 to 9 minutes overall. It's very minimal in terms of its scope, but it's ultra focused, direct and completely immersive. This is what makes this bout such an amazing and brilliant fight sequence overall, and that's why it remains for me the greatest one-on-one fight within all of cinematic history. So those are my thoughts and feelings and breakdown of what I've deemed are the best one-on-one movie fight sequences of all time. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As I mentioned at the start of this video, if you disagree with any of my choices, then let me know and we can have further discussion and debate afterwards. If you enjoy me doing these type of breakdowns and you have any other subjects or topics that you'd like to see me do further commentary on in typically this type of fashion, then let me know in the comments and I can see if I can provide a similar breakdown for you in the near future also. Please also hit and like those subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.